we're now like so digitized that there's so many opportunities for all of us to get involved as consumers. And there's a lot of potential there that I think falls under all of the above, but gets missed because most of the conversations there deal with like the federal big picture conversation.
Hello. Welcome again to the episode of the Let People Prosper show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on someone who knows a little bit, a lot about energy markets, electricity, what's happening at the federal level and even at the state level. And it's none other than Josh Smith. Josh, welcome to the Let People Prosper show.
Thanks for having me, Vance. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, it's really my pleasure to have you on. We've chatted a few times over the years and got to know each other. So it's really a pleasure to have you on the show now. But before we get going too much, let me go ahead and read your bio for the audience, and then we'll jump right into it. So Josh T. Smith is the energy policy lead at the Abundance Institute, a nonprofit dedicated to ensuring that emerging technology has the runway to grow and thrive. He earned a master's in economics at Utah State University and now writes at Powering Spaceship Earth. And you can follow him at Smith T. Josh on X and Blue Sky. So with all that great stuff going on, Josh, what motivates you to do what you do every day?
Yeah, thanks, Vance. I'm motivated very simply by, you've probably seen this same clip of Steve Jobs, right? He's talking about with a reporter on kind of what motivates him. And he says, like, people don't realize that you can reach out and poke the world, right? That's the kind of energy we have at the Abundance Institute. Like, we can propose policies, we can propose changes, we can figure out better ways to do things and move forward. And I was excited. I listened to a couple episodes before coming on, right? And Ann Bradley was my professor at the Fund for American Studies. And it's exciting to see, like, I went out to DC, did a summer internship, met Ann and met a bunch of other people and got plugged into a wider network who are working to, poke the world to make it different and better. And that's what gets me up and motivates me every day. In March, I had my first 2 kids.
Yeah.
Exciting, right? Lots
Congrats.
of fun stuff. And on the energy side, right, it's exciting to think about, like, okay, there were lots of late nights with them where I was sitting and reading on my phone and thinking about, like, what is the world going to be like for them? So that's what gets me up, gets me motivated, gets me excited.
Yeah, I love that, Josh. That's cool about Ann as well. She was fantastic. She's great, a scholar and person in general. So I'm sure that was an extraordinary experience.
Yeah, the Fund for American Studies program she participates in is great. If you were a younger, like if you're an undergrad, their program is exceptional, unparalleled in my opinion. So nice.
And it's cool too. Like if you start connecting the dots, to your point earlier, I've got 3 young kids. So congrats on the 2, man. That's a lot all at one time. But we're bringing about abundance, just the 2 of us already, right?
Yeah.
But when you think about these things of how they connect the dots over time, you're right. Like that American Fund, when you go there, you meet all these people, and then what that gets you to do what you're doing today. If I go back, to my graduate school days at Texas Tech University, I did a Koch Foundation scholarship, a summer, Koch summer fellowship with the Institute for Humane Studies at the time. And that really got me all in the world of like liberty and free markets and Austrian school economics and a whole bunch of other stuff that I'm still connected with a lot of them today, that to get me not only to the Texas Public Policy Foundation, where I worked for a decade, to the White House, chief economist at OMB, and then now, owning my own business with Ginn Economic Consulting. And I'm still able to have a lot of those folks on now on my podcast, the Let People Prosper show. So it's great the way we're able to connect. Maybe that's a big part, an untapped resource we forget sometime about, the social capital, the networking that goes on that helps to bring about more abundance. What do you think about that?
I think that's right. I think, especially because we're going to talk energy policy today, thinking about the network, not just at the federal, but the state level. One of the things we've really pushed is there's a whole network called the State Policy Network that does tons of policy work at the state level, and all sorts of barriers to the energy abundant future that we all want are at the state level, right? We can do a lot of stuff to figure out better permitting processes, to make it easier to build. It takes 10 years to build a transmission line, but really it only takes 3, because 3 years are construction, 7 years are paperwork, right? There's all sorts of little problems to work out, little and big problems. And that network of state groups and federal groups is an exciting kind of endeavor to get involved with.
Yeah. So with your master's degree in economics, what was your thesis? What got you interested in economics?
Yeah, I owe a lot to Ryan Yonk and Randy Simmons. Randy's a professor here at USU. He actually just retired, and Ryan Yonk's at AIER now. But they inspired exactly that kind of like, you can reach out and poke the world, right? Most of the opportunities at USU and most of the opportunities for research are for graduate and PhD level students. And what Randy and Ryan built early on was a undergraduate focused program, which is where I got my start. And so from that, I've now still work on energy policy. My thesis was kind of what you'd expect of a lot of energy wonks at the time. I was wondering, like, what are the effects of renewable portfolio standards? These are, green mandates basically that say Utah will generate X amount from these qualifying sources. And in the paper, it's a really technical difference in difference analysis, very, very typical kind of what you would expect out of a master's student. And what I find is probably not going to surprise you. These kinds of mandates don't really work, right?
Yeah.
Instead, what we get are higher energy prices. And what's driving investment instead, is the pitch that I make now in particular, should be prices, should be markets and open bidding processes, not state level or federal level mandates.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I know we learned a lot about that with our theses or dissertation or something else, but what's cool about you, Josh, is you've been able to not only take that more academic research, but turn it into things that people want to read or are willing to read and hopefully have an influence on public policy, which I know you're doing a lot about at the Abundance Institute. So I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about the Abundance Institute and some of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, the Abundance Institute is devoted to building runways so the next big thing can take off, right? So I talk with a lot of energy companies about the problems that they're facing. And one example I like a lot is this battery company. They're not the typical kind of lithium chemical energy storage battery. They're instead a giant insulated toaster, right? They take in really cheap electricity when there's too much wind on the system, too much solar. They feed it into this insulated toaster and they store it for then industrial processes to use later. The problem there is, well, when the normal process to connect to the grid says, okay, you are a nameplate of 100 megawatts. We'll model you as if you're going to add 100 megawatts to the peaking moments, which is the opposite of this company's business model, right?
Yeah.
But when they want to expand and scale up beyond the one-off bespoke kind of arrangements they've made with local utilities and state governments, that's a barrier because now the utility says, well, we have to build a bunch. And so now they're saddled with these upgrade costs. So one of the things we want to do is introduce a lot more of this flexibility, right? The energy system is ripe for all kinds of technological innovations along the lines of people like Michael Giberson and Lynn Keesley have been writing about this for years. But that means rethinking interconnection, permitting reform, and 100 other kinds of policies that were designed with something else in mind. And so have cut off our ability to have these innovations come around.
Wow. Yeah. It's great work overall. And Abundance Institute, is it based in Utah still or in DC or?
Yeah, we've got two offices, one down in Salt Lake City. I'm located in Logan, which is about an hour and a half north of Salt Lake. And then we have an office in DC where more the tech policy team works. So Taylor Barkley and Eli Dorado and others. But yeah, we're excited. I mean, Utah is an interesting place doing interesting things on energy policy. And broadly, the Institute works in energy policy and artificial intelligence. And those have basically become the same area over the last 6 months, last 18 months, maybe. So exciting areas.
Yeah, no, definitely. And of course, there's not any disagreement in either one of those areas.
Exactly. Right. We chose two very, plain, simple, uncontentious topic areas to dive into when we founded back in April. Right.
Right. Yeah, man. It's great. And you are doing great work on that. And I think, the abundance idea, which is probably why they made the name that, but I mean, the abundance is just so important and it goes in so many different ways. It's kind of why, like for me, with the Let People Prosper, prosperity isn't just material things. That is one of them. It's important for us to be able to grow and sustain and things of that nature, but it's not the end all. I also think about prosperity spiritually, mentally, socially, all the different factors. There's a lot that goes into prosperity in my view, which is ultimately to try to get government out of the way as much as possible so that way people can prosper. But I think about it in some sense like that with abundance, right? Like abundance can be a lot as well. Is that kind of how you see it and the Institute sees it as well?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I like this book called Free Market Existentialism, right? It's by Bill Irwin. Great read. Short academic kind of style philosophy. Cato did a symposium on it and a podcast if you want a shorter introduction. But I think abundance can really do one big thing, which is make a lot of different worlds possible for you.
Yeah.
It can't give you that sense of meaning, right? You've got to provide that and get excited for yourself about how you want to poke the world.
Yeah.
And that's more and more possible if we make energy cheap, if we provide all these artificial intelligence tools, right? I think that's the potential that we're all working towards, is how do we find ways to enable new technologies that make us all wealthier and better off?
Yeah. Amen. I love it. Okay. And of course, Taylor Barkley and Chris Koopman and all the other folks, it's a great group. So if you don't know about Abundance Institute, go check them out. It's a great group. Okay, Josh. So now let's get into some of the big policy issues and other energy issues that's going on. Maybe we start at the federal level and then we can go down to some of the state level issues. We've just had 4 years of the Biden administration. Well, nearly 4 years now of the Biden administration. We've got a new Trump administration coming in, but we kind of know what the Trump administration did during the first term, which I was there for a year as chief economist for the Office of Management and Budget. I wonder, from your vantage point and looking at energy and everything else, what are some of the key issues that you're looking at the federal level?
Yeah, I think very simply, the core problem that we have in energy today is that it is too hard to build. It comes down to, in every case, it's that simple. Yeah. It's too hard to build a transmission line. It's too hard to build a new gas generator. It's too hard to get the zoning permission for your solar farm, for your wind farm. There are so many veto points that prevent progress that Trump too should make that their core idea. Let's make it easy to build and usher in a world of energy abundance by just making it easier, as you say, to let people prosper.
Yeah, definitely. No, I like that, the shortness of it. Like, look, just unleash them, unlock what's happening in the earth that's below us, or things that we can build and innovate and everything else. And it's unfortunate that we have so many bureaucrats really running the show and regulators running the show versus markets and profitability.
Right. I think that's the right way to think about it. Trump too needs to make it easier to build. They need to implement market-oriented policies, and that's going to unleash a lot of abundance. So in one concrete example we've been working a lot around is on what to do about NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. These kinds of reviews, and actually here's something that people often forget in this conversation. NEPA is a bipartisan devil. Everyone since Clinton has tried to undo the paralysis by analysis it creates. And I think the Trump administration made good suggestions. Eli Dorado and I submitted comments back in, I think, 2018, 2019 on the proposed reforms. But it's a great example. And I think our first ask would be, let's just fully repeal it. It reflects not an idea of energy and environmental abundance. It reflects the kind of Paul Ehrlich anti-human ideology that humans are a problem and not part of the environment by nature. And so I think, if we can't get the full repeal, there's a lot of small tweaks. We can shorten the statute of limitations, make it harder to sue, limit the kinds of things you can sue over, and try and make the process even more collaborative. Because right now, a lot of what happens is adversarial. So an environmental organization will sue to prevent a development. As soon as you resolve those complaints, they'll be like, oh, well, you haven't thought about these 6 other endangered species or other problems under NEPA. And so they slow roll the kind of process, and just making that, taking that out and saying, look, you've got to come forward with all your problems in your first go. You can't be slow rolling these kinds of things. Yeah. There's all sorts of low hanging fruit, but full repeal should be our starting point, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like sometimes, Josh, within the policy world, that some try to make incremental reforms, which I think are important. I think that the other side, if you will, like the left, I'm more libertarian, I'm classical liberal, but let's say more on the center right of that. They've made a lot of incremental reforms to get to where we're at today. So I think that there is a good point to making incremental reforms back in the right direction from my viewpoint. However, I do think we need North Stars. I think we need this is the gold standard, if you will, of where we want to be. So that way you can make incremental reforms to get there. And I think sometimes, Josh, is if I have to look internally about maybe libertarians or conservatives, is that we oftentimes will forget the North Star and just focus on those incremental reforms. And I wonder what your thought is on that.
I think that's right. I'm all for incremental reform. Sometimes it's all that's on the table.
Yeah.
And politics is not a game of where you should wait until you have full authority, a trifecta in the US Congress and the presidency, and just go for it, right? Yeah. What we have are competing interests, and there are people who disagree with me on all the value systems that we've laid out here. And so it's okay to say, well, maybe we have to, in order to get like easier oil and gas leasings, we've got to give some offshore wind leasing, or we've got to streamline not just the permitting for pipelines, but permitting for transmission, or permitting for wind farms and everything else. And as an all of the above guy, I think that's great, but I've realized we've got to make concessions at certain points. And the good news is there's a lot of reasonable people in the middle, and we'll find plenty of allies from the left to the right who are interested in a world of energy abundance. They might disagree with you and me on if we were to project out like what the energy mix will be in 2050 and if we'll meet net zero goals, but they are interested in making the future energy abundant. So there's lots to do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, what do you, it's been interesting right now because oil production in particular has continued to reach record levels, even under the Biden administration. And I know that this is kind of counter. It was actually counter to what I would have expected, given all what I'm hearing about permits and everything else. And I remember I had Daniel Turner from Power of the Future on here recently on the show. And he highlighted that, permitting can take years. And so the production that's happening was actually a lot of the permitting during the Trump administration. So it could be interesting to see what happens over the next few years when the Biden administration was holding a lot of this up, that we could be in some hurt for a little while. And maybe this is more to your point of the Trump administration needs to come out hitting the ground hard with build because of the backlog that we could see in the future. What are some of your thoughts on that?
I think that's entirely right.
Okay.
We should be thinking about YIMBY for energy, right? Yes, in my backyard. We should have a lot more development of all types. So I want to see not just Trump 2 set oil and gas records, but I would love to see them set wind and solar records too, right? Like, look, electricity, once you get something on the grid and it's generating, all electrons spend the same, right? It's dollars versus quarters, right? They all spend the same. They add up in different ways, but you can use it to power whatever industry you want, whatever computations you want to run in your fancy AI labs are all doable under any kind of generation. So that's the kind of mentality. And for context, think about this, the paperwork holding back huge amounts of energy generation. In fact, the 2.6 terawatts that are waiting for interconnection to connect into the rest of the system.
2.6 terawatts?
Terawatts. And that would basically double the size of the grid, right? Yeah. And in reality, we get about, I forget the numbers exactly, but it's about 1 in 5 projects actually survives that process, right?
Wow.
That's a problem, right? We should want more than 1 in 5 guys who says, I'm going to start a solar farm. I'm going to start a gas plant. We want more than 1 in 5 to make it. So that means rolling back permitting requirements, means making interconnection processes simpler. One final example on this, Governor Shapiro, and in response to the 3 Mile Island restart by Microsoft and Constellation Energy, Governor Shapiro had to send a request to the grid operators in PJM and ask nicely, would you guys speed this particular one up because we think it's important? And you should never need a governor to intercede on your behalf if you're restarting an old plant in particular. But think of all the new stuff held back by exactly that. And not that much of it is nuclear, right? The interconnection queue is overwhelmingly wind, solar, and gas. So there's lots of opportunities there, but we've got to straighten out the paperwork. And this is why I think Trump 2 is exciting. Republicans, the center right, have been much better at cutting red tape than have the Dems, right? They can subsidize, but they can't build a system that actually lets entrepreneurs go out and try things.
Yeah. Great point there, Josh. One of the things I was thinking about too is, you have this energy landscape, and I'm with you. Like, I'm all the above. Like, I want to see the marketplace work, and wherever the profitability and the price signals take us, then that's where I want us to go. And so, oftentimes I maybe talk a little bit negatively about wind or solar as being unreliable during certain times of the year compared to more reliable sources of energy like, coal or oil or natural gas, which is cleaner burning and everything. However, even though I may be a little bit critical of that, the criticism is really because of the government coming in, intervening in those markets. It's not the technology itself. I don't have any problem with that. I would like for you use more of the what I believe is God's given resources for us to be able to use in order to be more abundant and more prosperous in our future. But there are a lot of production tax credits. There are subsidies, the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, that was a massive green energy agenda sort of scheme that was put through. There's a lot of pushes that are, that have helped out wind and solar for a number of years. While on the other side, there are a lot of increases in taxes on oil and gas, like severance taxes at the state level. Like in Texas where I live, there's a severance tax that funds the rainy day fund, but they're not on wind and solar. And so there's these kind of push and pull, if you will, on the supply and the demand side for a lot of these energy sources. And sometimes that makes it difficult to really get an idea of, okay, what are the levelized costs? What's the best way to figure out that it's going to be profitable in the future? And my North Star here is that I would love to see the day that we get rid of all tax breaks, all subsidies, and just let the market work. That's my vision of a free market in energy. Considering that we probably won't get there anytime soon because of interest groups and rent seekers and everything else. How else do we think about this, Josh, from your perspective on dealing with these interventions in the energy market that may be holding us back from being as abundant as we are when we're seeing, in Texas, the big Texas freeze of Uri back in 2021, which I was without power for like 6 days. That really hurt Texas hard. And how can we start to overcome some of these issues moving forward?
Yeah, I think this is the right kind of question to be asking is, look, the Tax Foundation has a new report out that says the next 10 years, we're expected to spend $921 billion on the IRA subsidies. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. And it's impossible it will all be spent well. So we should be working with state governments to ask the federal government to get rid of these kinds of subsidies, stop the interference, to find also better alternatives. So one of the tax programs that the Tax Foundation and other groups tend to like is called full expensing. Basically, it encourages investment by giving you the ability to write off that investment sooner. Those kinds of policies could replace the federal interference, but the subsidies are only one kind of problem. Like here's a heretical belief that will get us both canceled. Econ 101 is a great guide.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So I'm sure we're in trouble now of getting canceled. But that Econ 101 says you've got to let prices work. So these subsidies are a problem because they're distorting the market. But second, we should also want free entry. We should want the system to let people in as fast as possible. And so on this front, you should think about it's not just that it takes 5 years to get through the interconnection queue, right? There are ways to speed that up. But it's also that when we talk about all of the above, I think people on the left are sometimes rightfully skeptical because it almost always just means we want to keep coal around, right?
Yeah.
But all of the above is a great way to think about it because we should be all of the above for even those stuff that's sounds weird, right?
Yeah.
Like virtual power plants, distributed energy programs. And we don't want those to have bad subsidies that are associated with them to distort the market, but we want it to be possible for you and me, Vance, to quit our day jobs and go to work, building a gas plant or a solar farm, right? Yeah. But we also want it to be possible for someone to say, I want to install a battery in my house and participate in the market somehow. Or I want my Nest thermostat to be able to adjust and use power in the middle of the day when it's super sunny and hot, pre-cool my house so I'm not using power on the system peak. There's all sorts of opportunities. And I think it's Energy in Texas just announced a big virtual power plant. There's all sorts of innovations on that customer side as well. And it's weird because it's not the typical one-way generation flow that we built the system around in the early days from Pearl Street on, from Edison's days, right? We're now so digitized that there's so many opportunities for all of us to get involved as consumers. And there's a lot of potential there that I think falls under all of the above, but gets missed because most of the conversations there deal with the federal big picture conversation.
Yeah, great points there. I think when you put it in that way, is also helpful because in all of the above approach, I think when we think about if you have cancer, you're looking at all the above strategies to get rid of that cancer. Whenever you're looking at a broken leg, you're looking at every strategy that you can fix that leg. Or education. It's one reason why I'm in favor of school choice, universal education savings accounts, because it's kind of an all of the above approach to fitting the unique needs of each one of your kids. And so with energy and all the above approach is trying to fit the unique needs to get electricity so we can be here talking, virtually and everything else. And so I think that it really does bring together all these moving parts. I just wish that we could get rid of some of these production tax credits and subsidies, and maybe we will. Because I think if we go too much in the direction, what I'm kind of concerned about at the end of the day is when you have too much emphasis on wind and solar in particular during the times when it's not windy and the sun isn't shining, you can get into some situations that also hurts natural gas. And there's some different research on what happened in Texas, right, during Uri. But a lot of the natural gas plants were kicked off as some of the electricity generation wasn't going there. You didn't have the sun, you didn't have solar energy, everything was iced over and the wind wasn't blowing. And so there wasn't as much energy on the grid. And we have ERCOT, which is a single in Texas, is separated from the rest of the at the national level. And so that has pros in some sense, but also has some costs in this case. And that kicked off a lot of the natural gas plants as well, to where we had this brownout, blackout for 4 or 5 days in many places across the state. I don't know that just having natural gas plants would have saved us from that. But I do think about some of the cost of what was there from us putting so much emphasis on wind and solar in Texas, because Texas is the leader in wind and solar, which is a good thing. And from an abundance, all the above approach, but it comes at a cost of how much that we put the lever towards wind and solar compared to oil, natural gas, and nuclear energy. And so I'm hopeful that we can start to see some of that level out. I know in Texas, kind of moving in some of the state-based policies, Texas, the last session, they passed this Texas Energy Fund. It was a constitutional amendment. It's a constitutionally dedicated fund that had $5 billion for low-interest loans to natural gas projects. I came out against this, Josh. Didn't get a lot of friends that way, but this was a big push because some within the state of Texas, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick in particular, is like, look, we've got to find a way to get away from what the federal government's doing. And so since we can't really take away their production tax credits and other things, we're just going to prop up natural gas. And to me, Josh, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, man, but like, two wrongs don't make a right is what my mama told me, and so this seems like two wrongs are trying to put us in the right direction. And now in Texas, the lieutenant governor and even Governor Abbott have called for another $5 billion this next session that starts January 14th. In addition to the $5 billion before, to have additional lower interest rate loans for natural gas projects. And this just seems like the wrong direction for me, but I don't know, man, correct me if I'm wrong.
I think the all of the above framing is the right one because reliability is a system level attribute, not an attribute of specific sources, right? So Uri is not a story of failure of any particular source in so much as we had failures at almost every level. So you have natural gas freezing before it can get into the system and get to consumers' homes. You have critical infrastructure that would have piped that gas if it would have been produced to homes and to generators that were designated as demand response or designated in other programs to have their electricity turned off. So we ended up in a system where, well, actually we can't even send the gas to places we would need if we wanted to turn it up, which of course we did, right? And so I think that you've got to think about all of the above as top to bottom. So thinking through not just any specific source, but the whole system. And in that case, I think prices are still the right guide. And that's because they indicate to consumers and to producers what's valuable. So as we have a bunch of wind and solar come online, that changes the market prices during those times when they are online. And then they can't affect the price when they're not generating, right? Except to push it up, which is good news because that provides the incentive for residential battery companies to get involved, for natural gas producers and generators to create or build new peaker plants to catch those moments when prices go really high. And I think that's the kind of story that Texas gets right. It takes about 20 months in Texas to get connected to the grid. Fastest in the country, right? By far.
And the other one was 5 years?
5 years on average for the interconnection queue, 40 months, I think, for everywhere else, right? Wow. So what Texas gets right is it makes it much easier for all of us to get, if you and I want to quit our jobs and go start a generator company of any type, it's the fastest to market in Texas. And so you've seen that happen in Texas with solar, huge amounts of solar coming online. And the reason prices matter now is because in the middle of the day, on a hot, sunny day, power prices will be zero or sometimes negative, right? Because there's tons of stuff on the grid. And so the question, or tons of lots more generation than demand for it. And that means we should find ways to use more power during those moments. And then we should also be making investments about what to do in the shorter and shorter timeline when power supply is short, right? So you get that in the evening as the solar drops off. And that's when gas makes back its money for its investments in the marketplace. So I think the prices are the right guide to provide the reliability. Of course, we probably ought to do some insulation on our gas system so that it's secure to future problems. And that's where the government failure comes in, right? In 2011, I think there was a report from ERCOT, from the PUC of Texas, that said we should winterize our gas plants so we don't get another freeze. And yet in 2021, a decade later, they hadn't taken the right actions. And so those kinds of moves reflect, I think, Uri as a story of system failure top to bottom. And we should be thinking about system reliability as a system level attribute and not from any specific source, which makes the Texas Energy Fund a little questionable. If there was a market for gas, we should see more people coming online. Not to say that there isn't plenty to do, as Travis Fisher and others at Cato have pointed out, on federal permitting for gas plants. Or as R Street has pointed out, there's problems with like building new pipelines. All of those matter, and matter not just for federal level goals, but for keeping the lights on at your home.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what abundance is all about. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary. Just take a step back for just a moment, is that, other than Uri in February of 2021, whenever we didn't have power for 4 or 5 days, otherwise, when I go to the switch, I'm pretty sure it's going to come on whenever I flip it up. And whenever I turn on my computer, I'm pretty sure it's all going to come on. I mean, it's a testament to the ingenuity, the entrepreneurship that has happened over many years, decades, centuries even, of getting to the place that we're at today with all of this abundance that's happening. I think that's what's so great about the work that you're doing, Josh, at the Abundance Institute, and just in general, is how do we harness that abundance for the future to make sure that we can continue to keep the lights on, right? And have the electricity so that way we can do what we want to do to prosper instead of being reliant on others, because a lot of other places across the globe are not to the level that we're at today. And I hope they are sooner rather than later. But it is so important to figure out ways to continue to push the envelope to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. And, this is one where I just think that the Texas Energy Fund has put us in the wrong direction, but one where that I do think we're moving in the right direction, maybe in Texas and some other places, is looking at like molten salt reactors for nuclear power plants, for looking at these, what are they, the modular nuclear
small modular program.
I think those things are going to be extraordinary for the future. And especially when you think about technology, which is the other part of abundance, right? Is all these data centers and the AI, and there's going to be a lot more electricity use. There was a report put out earlier this year, which is one reason why the governor and lieutenant governor called for $5 billion more in the Texas Energy Fund, was that I think 50% of the increase in electricity use over the next 5 to 10 years is going to be from data centers in Texas. A massive amount of energy that would take away from the grid, if you think about it from just one source of energy. But if we allow for these modular reactors and things of that nature to happen to where they can have their own electricity for those data centers, I mean, this could be huge, right?
Right. There's a lot of innovation happening behind the meter, right? The idea of bringing your own power. These are exciting. They go back to actually the insulated toaster example. We need to create systems and rules that allow them to connect into the grid. I've talked with a bunch of the tech companies, and they are interested in bringing their own power. They're interested in these kinds of modular nukes. Like, they're putting billions and billions into developing them right now across all of the big tech companies. But they also want to connect to the grid as a secondary backup source, as just in case. And so what you saw, if maybe followers and your listeners heard about the FERC denying the Talon deal with Amazon. And Talon owns a nuclear power plant and set up a data center on site, with the idea being that the nuclear site would provide power to the data center. FERC denied that, saying, well, look, there are transmission costs, there's system costs that we should think about. And I'm disappointed that they denied it. In some ways, I understand the argument about system costs too. So there's lots of work. And what I'm happy to see is that FERC is actually doing that work now. They've had a couple technical conferences to say, how do we enable this behind the meter kind of system? How do we account for co-located generation and demand, right? The whole electricity system really started out as a one-way flow. And simply that, we had generators on one side, consumers on the other. You get this to start breaking up and throughout almost immediately, but in all sorts of ways, until now we have the ability not just for, you and me to put rooftop solar on, but there could easily be a nuclear powered data center in the next 10 years that is this kind of small modular program. But we've got to actually enable those. That means figuring out the interconnection process, the permitting and licensing problems with NRC, and then figuring out who's going to pay for that. I think that's the exciting thing about the nuclear deals that have come out is 3 Mile Island, Restart, the deals with Kairos, all of these companies are making big investments that are going to power the future and eventually our homes too, right? There's all sorts of interesting ideas here, but they've got to be enabled by letting people try and experiment things.
Yeah. Yep. Well put. Okay. So as we're wrapping up here now, what do you think about the future? Like, what are you most optimistic or maybe even pessimistic about? And what are some of the recommendations that you would give for federal and state policymakers about how to best make sure that we have abundance across the country?
I love that question. I think the thing I'm excited about has always been that people are impressive individually and collectively, right? I started with Steve Jobs, so maybe it makes sense to conclude with a little Steve Jobs reference too. He's got this amazing little letter that it's an email. He emailed himself, right? And he's talking about, look, I'm using a language I did not invent, using computers and technologies that I could not create myself. And yet here I am able to do these great things. And one piece I really like is that it ends with like the kind of default sign off from old Macs, which is like sent from my Mac or something, right? Here you have this guy, like in design genius, right? And one of the touchstones, right, of innovative ideas. And he starts by reflecting on his position in the culture as a whole. I didn't build all of this, but I built this small thing. And I think that's the promise, right? I hope that my twins grow up to do great things. I hope they grow up to be successful people. And that's exciting. That's a future that we can all be optimistic about. And what makes me pessimistic is that there are people who also stand to gain by preventing those kinds of developments and innovations, right? We have a problem with permitting reform. We have a problem with building because we make it too hard to build. And so that's the solution or the problem that I'm looking for solutions to. I want to make it easy to build, make it easy for people to prosper.
Awesome. Well, keep up the good work. Where are some of the best places to find you?
Yeah, my Substack is Powering Spaceship Earth. And then I'm also on Twitter and Blue Sky, MissionThe Josh. You can also reach out to me over email or LinkedIn, anywhere else. I'm monitoring inboxes. I might be slow to get back to you, but always excited to hear what you think. And, if you are interested in working on these kinds of issues, reach out. The whole network that we talked about, the State Policy Network, there will be someone in your state, in your area, maybe in your city or next door who wants to reach out and poke the world. And that's the kind of optimism and energy we want to bring at the Abundance Institute. So I'm always excited.
Yeah, awesome. I love it. And I love that idea about poking the world. We need to do more of that. So thank you for all the work that you're doing, Josh, and God bless you and your family. And as y'all continue to grow, hopefully y'all can be abundant and prosper.
Thank you, Vance. And Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. That's right. Same to you. For the audience, thank y'all for joining us again today. I hear a lot more about energy at the federal, state, even the local level as well. Ultimately, what happens at your home is going to influence a lot of what happens with electricity into the future and making your life more abundant and prosperous. Thank you for joining us. Go give us a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcast. You can find more information at vanceginn.com or go to my Substack, vanceginn.substack.com for more information. Until next time, let people prosper.